Go to the podium and state your name and address. Items that are not on the agenda, members of the public may speak under visitors to be heard on any topic not on the agenda. Remarks are limited to 5 minutes and no decision will be made at this time. For regular agenda items, public testimony will be taken at the beginning of each agenda item after the subject has been announced by the mayor and explained by staff. Any citizen who wishes may speak one time for 5 minutes on each agenda item. Public testimony will then be closed and the topic will be given to the governing body for possible action. At this point, only City Council members and staff may discuss the current agenda item unless a council member moves to allow another person to speak and there's unanimous consent from the council. Questions from council members, however, may be directed to staff or any member of the public through the presiding officer at any time. We have two proclamations. The first one is Wallace Post number 1 proclamation, and Tom, would you please read that?
Did you read
after the proclamations?
Yeah. I'm new to this.
I saw you.
This proclamation addresses the American Legion Wallace Post number 1. That's a significant number. It's first in the state. Whereas the American Legion began in March 1919 in Paris, France in the aftermath of World War I. And whereas the American Legion was federally chartered on September 16, 1919, and is an influential force at all levels of government that is dedicated to service to veterans, strong national defense, youth, and patriotism. And whereas Wallace Post number 1 of Vermillion was organized on April 20th, 1919 as the first American Legion post in South Dakota. And whereas Wallace Post number 1 has a long history of supporting veterans and patriotism in our community. And whereas in celebration of this 100-year anniversary, among the several special events to take place throughout the year are Post number 1 movie night, an educational display at the Vermillion Public Library, a military ball, continued sponsorship of Boys State, and Post number 1 baseball this summer. Now, therefore, we, the governing body of the City of Vermillion, South Dakota, do hereby proclaim 2019 as Wallace Post number 1 year, and encourage all citizens of Vermillion to continue to support Wallace Post number 1 and thank them for their leadership efforts in our community. Dated at Vermillion, South Dakota, this 21st day of January 2019.
Thank you, Tom. Might as well bring the whole crew.
Bring the whole crew. Bring the whole family.
You gonna come receive this? Congratulations. Congratulations. All right, thanks. Anybody want to speak at the mic?
I can say a few words back.
Okay.
First off, it's nice to be back a little bit today, and thank you, Tom, for reading the proclamation so well. And we have, you can, as Jack read, or as Tom read, we have a lot of activities this year, and it should be an exciting year. And it's nice to be post 1, and we have a lot of things going on, fundraisers and numerous things. So watch out through the year, and we'll hopefully have a good year for the American Legion. Thank you so much.
Were you at the first one?
No, I missed the first one. Thanks.
Thank you, Ray. We have a second proclamation, and that's for Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Service proclamation. And Catherine, please, if you can read that.
Proclamation recognizing Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Service. Whereas Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. devoted his life to the advancement of civil rights and public service. He believed in a nation of freedom and justice for all and challenged all citizens to help build a more perfect union and live up to the purpose and potential of America. And whereas Dr. King recognized that everyone can be great because everyone can serve, and during his lifetime encouraged all Americans to serve their neighbors and their communities. And whereas in 1994, Congress initiated the King Day of Service, a nationwide effort to transform the federal holiday honoring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. into a day of community service grounded in Dr. King's teachings that helps solve social problems while focusing on bringing people together and breaking down the barriers that have divided us as a nation. And whereas hundreds of thousands of volunteers in cities and towns across the nation participate in King Day service projects in all 50 states, the District of Columbia, Guam, and Puerto Rico. And whereas the King Day of Service, which falls on January 21st this year, is a time for the people of Vermillion to recognize Dr. King's teachings on advancing equality and opportunity for all, by contributing their own time and talents in a day of service. Now therefore we, the governing body of the City of Vermillion, South Dakota, do hereby proclaim January 21st, 2019 as Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Service and encourage our citizens to honor the memory of Dr. King and to put his teachings into action by participating in the King Day of Service. Dated at Vermillion, South Dakota, this 21st day of January, 2019.
Thank you, Catherine. I don't think there's anyone here to receive this, so. All right, now, is there anyone that has an item that is not on the agenda that they wish to bring forth at this time? Please.
I am Alan Madison. I live at 1301 Rockwell Trail in the Bliss Point addition. I spoke last meeting in opposition to to sustaining the Planning Commission's grant of a conditional use permit to build townhouses at 317 and 321 Joplin Street in the Bliss Point addition. At that last meeting, you accepted comments from the public about the proposed project, and 6 people spoke in opposition to the project. According to the bylaws that apply to the Bliss Point properties, any of those 6 people are entitled to enforce the bylaws in court. Among other things, we oppose the proposed project because they violate the covenants that apply to the Bliss Point addition. I've written a letter to the city attorney, Mr. McCulloch, explaining our position, and I received a letter from him today. His letter does not, I don't want to be a jerk, his letter does not say it's a response to my letter, and I don't think it does respond to my letter. Basically, it provides legal support for the comments that he made at the last meeting, but does not respond to the comments that I made in my letter. First of all, I point out that under the city's Code of Ordinances, Section 155.004, the city is legally bound by lawfully adopted covenants that are more restrictive than the city's ordinances. And that is a rule in your city ordinances that has been adopted throughout the country in all kinds of different places. What they say is that in their interpretation and application, this is section 155.004 of the Code of Ordinances, in their interpretation and application, the provisions of this chapter shall be held to be minimum requirements. Wherever the requirements of this chapter are at variance with the requirements of any other lawfully adopted covenants, the most restrictive or that imposing the higher standards shall govern. And I put that in my letter, and Mr. McCulloch did not respond to that. Instead, what he did was he cited the South Dakota codified laws in a number of different places, and that's kind of odd because the city is bound by the city's laws. Is it bound by state law? Yes. Does the city have this most restrictive rule in it with respect to covenants? Does the state have it? No. But the state, the higher up you go, the more general the law is. The U.S. Constitution, very general. Federal law, often very general. The state law, a little bit more specific, and the city law is even more specific. And the city law says that you are bound by the lawfully adopted covenants of Bliss Point. And there was no response to that. And I don't know, maybe if it's possible I'm reading this wrong and Mr. McCulloch hasn't told me what I'm saying wrong here, but he has not given me the opportunity, if there is something like that, he hasn't given me the opportunity to respond to that. He also, the second point that I make is that how the proposed project violates the covenants. The covenants use the term single-family residential structure, and they tie a single-family residential structure to a single family. And that is the plain words of the covenants. And that is how covenants are interpreted. Mr. McCulloch at the last meeting talked about zoning laws and zoning terms and terms of, I'm trying to think of the word, terms related to a specific area of law, very technical terms. But covenants are read in very plain terms. And that is also in my letter, and I cite a South Dakota Supreme Court case for that. But there wasn't any response to that. What Mr. McCulloch merely just said, repeated what he said last time, which was something about dwellings, which the covenants don't refer to, and something about multiple ownership, which the covenants don't permit. So the covenants say if you have a single family, you have a single structure, and it doesn't matter that the single structure is on 2 lots. It doesn't matter that the single structure is owned by multiple families. It's a single structure, and it should be tied to a single family. If the single structure accommodates more than one family, it's in violation of the covenants. And I believe I'm reading this right. And I don't know if Mr. McCulloch has really parsed that language. He didn't respond to it. He's responded with the terms of art of zoning laws rather than the plain language that I brought up. And so what happens is when I say that the city is legally bound, that means that I've come before you. I have challenged the conditional use permit based on our covenants. I've informed you that you are bound by the covenants. I have informed you that the structure is in violation of those covenants, and that means you're bound by them. And by being legally bound, that doesn't mean you'll be personally liable for permitting the project. It just means that a resident will have grounds to sue the city in court to enforce the covenants as a result of your decision, and then we will find out whether my reading of this is correct, because I haven't gotten a response to them. As far as I know, my reading of this is correct, and you guys are bound, and I'm wondering if you guys have any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else in the audience that has an item that's not on the agenda they wish to bring up? Anyone else? Seeing none, council, any member of the council has anything that's not on the agenda? Okay, then we'll move on to public hearings. Item A, a special daily wine license for the Vermillion Cultural Association on or about February 16th, 2019 at 4 West Main Street, Vermillion Theater, for a special event. And Mike, please.
The Vermillion Cultural Association has submitted an application for a special daily wine license at 4 West Main Street, which would be the Vermillion Theater, for a special event on or about February 16th, 2019. The notice of hearing and police chief's report are included in the packet. The police chief reports noted that he has spoke with Jesse Hansen, who reported that they will be using a TAM-certified individuals for checking IDs and will be utilizing wristbands to identify people over 21. Has also noted that they've had special events here at the Vermillion Theater before, have been conducted by this organization without any incident. The special daily licensing fee has been paid along with the advertising fee, and following input from the public hearing, the council will be asked to make a decision on approval or denial of the special daily wine license for the Vermillion Cultural Association for the special event on or about February 16, 2019 at the Vermillion Theater at 4 West Main Street.
Thank you, Mike. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to speak on this topic? Turn it to the council. Tom?
Mike, do you know what special event means? Is it, obviously it's at a theater, but I don't know if it means it's a movie, but what is special event?
In the past, they've had bands there. They had other, I was trying to think of what some of the other, oh, that's right, the burlesque show was there.
For this specific reason?
I asked Jesse to send me a flyer or something as to what they were going to be doing, and I never received anything
Okay.
yet, so,
So we don't really know specifically, but.
no.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Kelsey.
It's the Jim McKinney Quintet.
Jim McKinney Quintet.
Jim McKinney Quintet. Well, there you go.
You know more than I did about this. Did we have a motion yet?
I move to approve.
Motion is second to approve the special. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Item B, the first reading of ordinance 1397 to rezone Lot 11 in Block 1, LaCroix Addition.
Thank you. In July 2008, the city adopted a zoning ordinance that created new zoning districts throughout the city and changed the allowable uses in those zones. The current zoning ordinance changed the allowable uses for general business zones and made residential units a non-conforming use. In December 2018, Mr. Archimedes Plutonium submitted an application to rezone 609 North Crawford Road from general business to R2 residential. As required by 155.101 of the zoning ordinance, staff created the petitions for rezone, which include all neighboring properties within 250 feet of that address, 609 North Crawford Road. The zoning ordinance requires that 45% of the aggregate area surrounding a property sign off before the rezone can be considered by the Planning Commission and City Council. Those petitions were circulated and they acquired the necessary amount of signatures. On July 14th, the Planning Commission voted unanimously to approve the rezone request. Now, if this were rezoned to R2 residential, the lot would be, as you can see by Jose's map up there, the lot would be adjacent to other lots zoned R2 to the south. South Dakota Highway 50 right-of-way to the north, and 2 general business lots to the west. The applicant states that the property's been for sale for 4 years, and the inquiries regarding the sale of this property have been primarily for residential use. During the Planning Commission meeting, we talked a little bit about the comprehensive plan, as that's one thing that we're required to consider. The comprehensive plan contains different elements for consideration that pertain to this. The petition to rezone before the council has a strong connection to that plan, in that one of the goals of the comprehensive plan is to create and maintain neighborhoods that are, quote, safe, healthy, livable, and compatible with adjacent land uses. That's on page 13. So approval of this rezone would not be detrimental to this goal. As you saw, there are adjacent residential housing to the south. But just kind of a philosophical conversation that we had with the Planning Commission is that also, as part of our comprehensive plan, it's kind of more the preference of the city to have business development take place along major highways like South Dakota Highway 50, as it's a visible area with convenient access to roadways and different things. As I put to the Planning Commission, it was zoned general business for a reason. But after some discussion, the Planning Commission kind of took a closer look at this location as a location for a business, and they found that the uniqueness of the lot makes it kind of more suitable for residential purposes. The lot, if they can just show the map real quick. So if you look just to the north of the lot, you see what will probably eventually be a frontage road. And then directly to the east, you will also see what could eventually be a city street. So basically, it's going to create a peninsula of this lot, which is going to make it difficult for points of access and things of that nature. Plus, there's a tremendous amount of trees and different things that would have to be cleared to make this a suitable location for a business. And so, taking all that into consideration, they decided that there were unique circumstances, and we agreed with their conclusion. And we would recommend that that you all would approve the first reading of 1397, which would indeed rezone this lot from GB to R2 and uphold the decision that the Planning Commission made.
Thank you, James. Anyone in the audience that wishes to comment on this item? Council?
I hope you never tire of my knowing history too much, but it's usually worth mentioning. Let me start by saying this is very similar to me to Cottage and Cherry, which was zoned general business and then got rezoned to residential. And so when it's convenient, we talk about residential components of the comprehensive plan, but we don't talk about what were the business goals of the comprehensive plan. So once again, we have a spot saved for business that we're going to just decide to turn into residential. Many years ago, about where the frontage road is, was sort of the north edge of a tree farm for a tree nursery, back when Usher and Barnes Abel owned this land. And kitty corner from this is a professional building, which is not residential, although it used to be residential. So my major question is not for right tonight, but I would like to know how much general business property is going to be left on Cherry Street. Or are we going to keep turning it into residential? There used to be a lot more between Plum and about Norbeck, but why is this better for access for a residence than it is for a business, especially if you add a street to the east?
Well, as far as how much land is left for commercial purposes, I mean, right now to the west, so there are two general business lots, one of which you guys will know as the Cornerstone Assemblies of God Church, and the other which remains undeveloped. So there's for sure that lot. I don't know if Jose would like to has any comments on what else is in that surrounding area, but
I guess as far as this surrounding area, James is correct. There's just this lot available right here. Yeah, it takes a little bit. Well, like James said, directly north of the church, there's that big empty lot where the sign that shows all the Vermillion High School championships, I guess, as you come into Vermillion. That lot would stay zoned general business. And then north of that, then you have the dentist, and a little bit north of that, there's actually a house that's zoned or within a general business zone area, which would be an incompatible use. As far as any remaining commercial business or zone property within the Cherry Street corridor, there's actually quite a bit. Maybe not necessarily at this location, but as you go further into the city, there's actually either a lot of property that would either be with residential uses right now that would be non-compatible, or that there's actually empty lot or underdeveloped lots. I can think of one right now next to the bank, to the new bank by Casey's, that's actually empty. So there's a lot of commercial entities. There's also a lot of commercial spaces, a lot of the strip malls that are empty probably, like a Cottage and Cherry. So there's a lot of space available, in my opinion. I'm not a realtor. I don't do any of this stuff, but just from my driving around town along Cherry, that's what I can see. In this location in specific, this parcel seems to be more suited for residential, just like James said, just because of the proximity to other residential uses, to the fact that the proposed owner of the lot will be putting a smaller house that will not be clearing all of the trees. We have actually spoken with him, and Mr. Bai could actually speak to that matter more than I could. So the proposed owner is actually very keen in having this particular lot because it services his needs. He wants something that covers him or protects him, I guess, from the neighbors. There's a lot of trees. He wants to be kind of in his own little spot within the city, and this kind of provides that for him. Now, the philosophical question whether this is right or wrong, well, that's something that we left up to the Planning Commission, and they unanimously voted for rezoning. Everything else is something that's probably out of my pay range, I guess, as far as what may be or what isn't. So.
Jose, thank you.
Jose, if it's out of yours, it's definitely out of mine.
I'm sorry?
Hazen by Dakota Realty, representing Archie. Just what they already talked about, Jose, lot 11 there. If I would agree with him 100% if it touched Cherry Street, but don't touch Cherry Street, and it's off of Cherry Street, so it actually touches the housing development more than it does commercial or general business. If it was something that was along Cherry Street, highly visible for a gas station, which couldn't be anyway because it's only general business, so you're not going to get that anyway at general business. So, but now if it's across the street, I say, hey, great, commercial, but this here touches houses and it's buffered by the DOT anyway, so it's off of Cherry Street, so it's not really visible for a commercial or a general business. So that's why I think it's good fit for a residential house. Goes right with the other ones that are there. So, any questions about that?
Thank you, Mr. Bai.
Yep.
Thank you. Approximately 3 weeks ago, John and I had a conference call with several representatives from Lyft, who is the transportation network company that's currently operating in the state and in the city of Vermillion. They had expressed concern about the background check language in our new ordinance. As I referenced, they probably weren't aware of our previous ordinance. In particular, they were concerned about the fingerprint background check requirement for TNC drivers. I mean, essentially, they told us, look, we have a very comprehensive process that's tried and true, and John and I essentially threw it back to them and said, well, this is the first time that we've heard from anybody from your company, and why don't you prove it to us? And essentially, they came back to us with a very impressive list of things that they do to conduct their background check process, and probably more comprehensive and more substantive than a fingerprint background check can ever be. I don't feel like I have many areas of expertise, but having done probably 20,000 criminal background checks, I can say that I was very impressed with their system. So essentially, right now we're looking at ways of kind of reconciling their request to remove this requirement because they think that they have something better, and they're not wholly comfortable with having the fingerprints of all their drivers on file, essentially. And so John and I discussed kind of how we would reconcile this, and I think that there are simple language changes that we could make that would basically allow companies like Lyft, who do have this thorough screening process that we've reviewed and find satisfactory, and basically our desire to make sure that any future companies that we have are operating with the same level of scrutiny that Lyft is and helping to maintain the safety of our community. And we think we can do that, like I said, by making some simple language adjustments. Those are outlined for you in the discussion portion. But essentially, we would ask that, or we would consider changing our language to remove the background check requirement, but in its place, add a blurb about the transportation network company having to conduct a city-approved background check so that we can take, if we do get another company that wants to operate in Vermillion, we can take a good look at their operation and make sure that we find it satisfactory. And then also kind of one of the smaller things, but I think it would go a long way in terms of just establishing the legitimacy of certain companies that might come to us wanting to operate in Vermillion, is that Lyft has provided us with a copy of their South Dakota sales tax license, and I think that that's also something that we could require of the companies in the future, just so that we know that they have legitimate standing in the state of South Dakota. So essentially, we're not asking you to take any action tonight, just explaining why we're here talking about this again. And, you know, Lyft was a little bit late to the conversation. I had wished that they had approached us earlier, that they had returned any of our requests to get a hold of them. But they are here now, and we have direct contacts there, and they're very responsive. They've actually helped us enforce some unlicensed drivers that we've had operating in Vermillion. So as far as drivers that were licensed by them who had not gone through our process. So they're very willing to do their part, and so far we're pleased with the changes that they've made and the relationship that we have with them going forward. So,
James, do you know, are they cash or is it only credit card?
it is only credit card. And all those transactions are logged for years.
So the tax would be automatically included.
Correct, automatically collected.
Thank you. Any questions for James? Tom?
I'm just curious about this. Age 19 is listed and not 18, which is the age of maturity under most law. Is there a reason it's 19 instead of 18?
State statute, yeah.
I'm sorry?
Sorry, that is actually state statute. That's the age that the state came up with. Yes. Yeah.
All right. Well, let me say thank you for your work on this. I know this hasn't been easy, and for your expertise. I'm all in favor of having staff move forward with an ordinance to propose based on this explanation, and again, thank you.
Yes, thanks, James. I don't think there's any action that we have to take on this. Okay, we'll turn next to item B, and it's the National Music Museum contribution request. And before we go to the specific numbers, I'd like to make a few observations about the National Music Museum, its role in our city, and in fact, in our nation. It's a recognized museum that has instruments from all over the world that are many one of a kind, that you won't find them anywhere else. I think it's important to our community that the museum stay in Vermillion. There have been overtures to try and move it out of our community, if not the whole museum, then some of the key instruments. And the key instruments are what we need as far as that museum is concerned. Over the years, I would say for the last 20 years, the museum's board of directors has been trying to figure out a way to expand the museum with more holdings. Right now, they're showing about 7% of the collection of 15,000 documents, instruments, etc. And what they would like, and those documents and instruments are not only in Vermillion, they're stored over up in Sioux Falls and other communities where we have no, and in fact, if you're familiar with our campus, Julian Hall, the basement area there, is stuffed with instruments that are really not in the condition that you would like to preserve these instruments. So come down a few years, the first efforts to add the museum, attach it to the old Coyote Student Center, we're going to have a price tag of in the ballpark of $20 million. And it was found that wasn't sustainable. We couldn't raise that kind of money. We have board members from all over the U.S., Texas, Florida, Boston, California, and of course right here in the Midwest, Omaha, Sioux City, etc. These people are very interested in the museum, maintaining it, increasing it, and improving it. And over time, they've questioned how does the city value this facility? And I think we value it very highly. It's one of the attractions that brings people into our community, and I think it's very important that we continue it. We have a budget. Can you put that on the overhead, please? This project is priced at about $10.5 million. In pledges in cash, there's about $7.7 million, the cash being 2.3 roughly. The university is contributing about 1.5 with the HVAC, plus they also do maintenance and that sort of thing with the facility. The question was, what would the city be willing to do? And the first number that they said, would the city be willing to do $1 million? And I said I didn't think so. I thought that was a little rich for us. And they said, well, what do you think they would do? And I said, well, I think the city would contribute at least $500,000 over a number of years. We certainly couldn't do it in 1 year. And so that's what's being proposed. And so I think it's up to the council to have discussion on this at this point in time. Don't all speak at once. Rich?
Well, I'd like to start off with a little bit of history. My wife and I, born and raised in California, moved here, and the sole reason we moved from California to here is because we both were very active in the early music society, playing early music, Shakespeare and so forth, throughout California. And we told one of our instructors, who also plays all the early music for the movies in Hollywood, and he immediately said, you have to go to Vermillion. They have a National Music Museum, and it's fantastic. So that was probably the main reason that the wife and I packed up and came here to South Dakota, and we went directly to Vermillion. And unfortunately, the university didn't have the early music program that was listed, but since then we're still working on developing it. But the museum has been phenomenal, is phenomenal. We constantly tell our friends back in California what is here, and we're looking forward to the day that we can finally have the Recorder Society come here to have their annual meeting, which would be substantial. I mean, the biggest problem we've had in the past is there wasn't enough hotels and stuff. now. I think there will be very soon for that group. So in that respect, I think it's a great benefit to the city, and it's, at least in California, well-known, as well as other places in the world. And I also had the privilege of quite often volunteering at the museum, so I really enjoy it, and a lot of things in it, and I played some of the instruments. I am certainly in favor of supporting it. I would like to propose that we support it to the tune of $100,000 a year for 10 years. I think
Is
this
that a
is-
motion?
I don't know if I need a motion, I'll make a motion if we're ready for that, if you'd like further discussion.
Maybe we should have some discussion,
Yes,
more discussion first.
okay?
Is that okay with the council if we continue discussion? Kelsey, please.
I wonder if we could maybe meet in the middle between the initial request and what Rich is suggesting, maybe something like over 7 years. That's maybe doing a little bit more than what we were originally looking at, but then $1 million does seem like a lot.
It's a big number.
A big number, and, you know, I would not be surprised if there's other things that we may need to help with later on down the road, and 10 years is quite a ways away, but I feel like we could make a substantial impact with $700,000.
While we're still discussing, that isn't a motion yet. Can we have continuing discussion?
Keep talking about it.
Yeah.
Can I?
Well, yeah, I just would ask John.
Yeah, you're-
I'm sorry.
It's your first turn.
Okay. Would this be too rapid to actually make a motion, or would staff need a little more time to look at budget? And I appreciate what Kelsey just said. It's, and we talked about this to some extent, quite a bit of extent, at the noon meeting, that there are various options out there, so there is some middle ground. This comes down to, you know, number one, if we do something substantial enough, it will keep this project moving. Is that the way I understand it?
That's correct.
And so it's important, I think, as much as we all hate to be under the timeline,
The current bid.
yeah, for the current bid to hold, it only, you know, it has apparently has an expiration date. So, and obviously, I think we're all for this for various reasons and ties over the years, but whether or not we should make a motion and approve it, I don't want to put the staff into a corner, and maybe Mike, you can address this since you and John both handle budgets, but what would you prefer that we do? Should we talk about it some more and then come back, or are we ready to make a motion and vote on it?
I think that we should give John and Mike, either or both, an opportunity to tell us where they think we could have the monies, but I'd like to see us do something tonight. So it's not just me, huh?
There we go. Well, Mr. Sorensen's question, I guess, we would suggest that it primarily come from the second penny fund, which, as the council knows, the community may not be as familiar with, but our second penny of sales tax we predominantly use for capital expenditures. Although late last year you did adopt an ordinance that would allow, if need be, the opportunity to use some of that for the operating costs, just due to some of the constraints we had in the general fund in 2019. Back about 2008 or so, the city did work with the university with respect to making a $340,000 contribution over 5 years to help with the wellness center in bringing that project about. And that money also came from Second Penny. So with respect to a source, we would recommend Second Penny as where you would take that from. And it is a capital investment that they're talking about at this point in time. So it matches up with what your adopted ordinance does say. With respect to the timing on it, quite honestly, the only things that I would say that we have a commitment on is your City Hall debt service is coming out of Second Penny. That is one of you're obligated, if you will, to pay that, and that's been the source. But each year, you as a council decide the priorities and how you want to allocate that money. So you would have the latitude. We would, or I guess I would suggest probably that depending what that amount is that you look at, it may be one of those that we, if you're making a multi-year payment, make a payment this year. In that in 19 we do have some of Second Penny money that's unallocated. Second Penny is one of those that some years we spend more than what we bring in, and some years we don't. And that's simply due to the fact that it's kind of our savings account, so to speak, that we use to fund large projects with. Probably about 5-6 years ago, we had saved up and we spent $1 million of that to help with the Edith B. Segrist Vermillion Public Library addition and renovation. Between that and other expenditures, that was one of those years we spent more than we brought in Second Penny. So I recommend that as your source, and I guess each year you'll have the ability to decide what the priorities are for that money.
John, is BBB anything that we could use if we had a shortfall? Does that fit under?
I guess I would suggest that it does, and that's for economic development, promotion of the community, tourism. So to me, is probably one of the top, I'll say 3 to be safe, tourist destinations in our community, in my opinion. I don't have numbers to back that up, but I think probably one of our top 3 tourist events I think would qualify for the use of that fund. We haven't historically had as much unobligated money in our bed, board, and booze fund that way. But it would be certainly, I think, a legal and permissible category to use that funding for.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I want to run through some of our long-term projects and to see if I am keeping them straight in my mind, and let me know if these things belong to Second Penny or not. So we're thinking about maybe a contribution to the Wellness Center.
We did that.
Well, I know, but in the future as well. Yeah, is that a possibility?
Assuming that it is the capital for the construction of it, I would say yes.
In addition
Similar
to the
what-
Wellness Center?
Yes.
Yeah.
Isn't our commitment to the Wellness Center completed yet?
The initial $340,000.
Yeah.
That pledge, if you will, has been completed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure, I just wasn't clear on what
Yeah.
you were.
Yes. I was thinking of a future addition to the Wellness Center
Oh.
that USD might come to us like they
I
did.
see.
There would be a new safety center possibly that might have Second Penny.
Yes.
We are exploring a community building under the ICAP, right?
Yes, I would, all these I'm going to say, if they're the brick and mortar piece, which I believe that's what you're suggesting versus the operating costs up and running, I would say those would be logical ones to come out there.
And the downtown, thank you very much.
Main Street.
So, knowing all of these future things that we want to do, and the importance of funding the Music Museum, does it matter whether we go 5, 7, 10, 15, 20 years, at $100,000, and that's just sort of a fixed cost that we see? Or is there something, 5 years from now that we're going to really need that $100,000 for, or 7 years from now? And I know we don't have everything set to when we would do anything, or if we're going to do some of the things that I mentioned. But do you have any thoughts on that?
I anticipate the downtown project is probably, of the ones that those 3, probably the most likely to come forward the soonest, and going to be probably one of the larger expenditures of those 3 in one bump. In that, we get in that construction project, it's going to be disruptive, it's going to alter traffic patterns and pedestrian patterns in the downtown. We're going to want to get it done in a year if possible versus over several years. And so I think, like with that, having a big lump sum project at one time, we're going to have a lump sum payout too that'll probably take place. So I think that's probably our largest one. I anticipate whatever the Public Safety Center courthouse project is, that will probably be a project that, due to the nature of it, if the county issues a bond or however that is done, it's probably going to be a multi-year project. And so in my opinion, you'd likely be contributing a portion for, the 10 to 20 years. There might be a bond out there on that in what our share is. And I would say the same with the community center type thing. I anticipate if something like that is formulated, figured out, determined what it would be, that would also be likely a bond that would require some outlay over a number of years. So I think, we're looking at some large projects. Anytime we get into capital, we're probably talking, 250 to 500 a year, probably for some of those expenditures. We're doing one of those, depending on what our involvement is in each one of those and the size of the overall project. I will say, it doesn't seem like it, but in about another 8-9 years, you'll have this building paid off, which doesn't seem like I've been in here that long, but, so that will free up what is probably your largest single, regular reoccurring payment out of Second Penny right now, is the debt service on this building. So then, I will say, a lot of the other expenditures that come out of Second Penny are to help departments with different capital needs that they have, so that our general fund, First Penny, can be utilized for other things. Most of those tend to be $100,000 or less. A penny of sales tax is around $1.9 to $2 million. So it's a whole bunch of those to equal $100,000 at a pop to equal $2 million. If I've helped any, or not.
Howard?
I guess I'm in favor of the 10-year plan with 100,000 each, because I think it's a real asset to our community. But I would ask both Mike and John if they feel comfortable if we would budget something like that for 10 years, or would we be better off backing it off to, say, 750 or something like that. But I think we should try to go as much as we can and without strapping ourselves too tight, because I think it's a real asset for the community and something that we should be very proud of and are very proud of and want to show how proud we are.
Rich?
In respect to the, we were talking about 10 years and 100,000, Nate, can you speak to, or would you like to speak to how soon that money would be available, or whether it be, 700 or 7 years or 10 years? Because I think we're talking, when you think 100,000 a year, you think, well, that's available, and next year you have to wait for the next 100. I don't think that's the case. Is that correct? Or can you speak on that, Nate?
Nate's the treasurer of the
Oh, thank you.
board.
Sure, thank you. Nate Welch here in Vermillion, also the treasurer of the National Music Museum Board of Trustees. Rich, I believe if your question you're asking just the availability of those dollars and how that would affect in the cash flow for the project that
Yes.
Mayor Jack was pointing out. Yeah, as I understand it, the funding source for this project, so long as they had a commitment, whether it be 7 years, $100,000, 10 years, $100,000, that type of a commitment will allow them to be able to fill in that gap that they have in the construction part of the project. And they've got some mechanisms to allow them on the cash flow to be able to meet all of the requirements for the construction in that time.
Yeah. What I was leading up to was the fact of whether we said 7 years or 10 years, it would make a difference. There'd be 300,000 more available essentially now that they could commit to. So, okay.
Correct. Yeah,
Yes,
thank
thank you.
Oh. Would you be able to go forward with the project with 7?
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. You
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's a very fair question. For one, again, on behalf of the Board of Trustees, I sincerely thank the council, and we're excited to be able to have this discussion. Yes, with the 700,000, we would be able to move forward with the project. With the interest that the city has allowed this discussion, I can tell you that a few of the other board members and contributors have really seen the city being willing to have this discussion and step up, and have been able to also allow themselves with that type of a commitment. 7 years, $100,000 each year would allow them to be able to fill the gap that they have.
I might also add that there will be a room or so in the museum that will be designated as the Vermillion whatever designation we want to have put on it.
Yes, I'm more than happy to speak on that a little bit. Again, as fundraising goes and a new expansion, you have some naming opportunities. I know that the Board of Trustees has offered, a gift of this size would allow naming rights for what is one of the classrooms in the expansion, which I think would be really neat, because they'll be able to open that up to the community and have that available, so the council at their choice would be able to name that room.
Tom, did you have another question?
I just wanted to say whatever we do, we started at 5, we're looking at 7, we're looking for middle ground.
Well, at one time, we had 100 million.
Yeah, I know. And then you decided you didn't quite have it. Anyway, what I want to say, and I'll do it musically, the Vermillion needs to provide a double forte for this. So 5 at least, over 10 years, $1 million, or whatever you want to do in between, but at least 500,000.
Rich?
I think his time is appropriate. Although I like 10-year, I would like to propose the 7-year, 100,000 per year. And then at the end of 7, that's a motion.
Second.
We can look at it again.
We have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? As I understand it, we're talking about 100,000 a year for 7 years for a total of $700,000. Is that understood by everyone? Is there any further discussion? We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Thank you. That's a big statement, I think. We have no bid openings, so we'll go to John's city manager's report, please.
Thank you. A couple of different items to share with you. Coming up on January 30th, that's a Wednesday, the South Dakota Office of Emergency Management and FEMA, they will be hosting an open house for review and comment on preliminary flood insurance rate maps or firms. These will be for all of Clay County. This open house, again, is January 30th. It's a Wednesday from 5 to 7 p.m. at the Fire and EMS station at 820 North Dakota Street. Thanks to Mike and his staff. Again, this year, the Government Finance Officer Association awarded the City Finance Office with the GFOA Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. This is the highest form of recognition in governmental accounting and financial reporting. So Mike and his staff do a good job, and it's nice that it is recognized by a national association again this year. I'm not sure he'll tell me how many years. It's about 16, 17 that we've had this in a row. He's had it more than that, but he's been 10 or 12.
But you had before that. You must have been gone 1 week or 1 year, but it's awesome. It's certainly awesome.
But thank you to the work that they do. And I know it helps me, and I believe it provides comfort for the council knowing the high quality of work that they do. The Heroes Behind the Badge Blood Drive is coming up here next week. There are 2 opportunities to contribute to this friendly competition between the police and the fire department. One is next Monday, January 28th from 10 a.m. to 6:30 p.m., and that's at the Sanford Vermillion Hospital. And the second opportunity is Saturday, February 9th from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m., and that's during the USD Sanford Health Fair over at the Med School building. And as a donor, you have the opportunity to vote whether you want to score one for the police department or fire department with your donation. So, okay.
A little prejudice over here on one side.
All donors are appreciated and welcomed, but see the man at the end of the table for how to vote. And then another reminder, ICAP will be having a public meeting next Monday, January 28th, and that's at 7 p.m. in the Kozak room in the public library. I believe last time I misstated and said it was here in the chambers. It is next Monday, January 28th at 7 p.m. in the Kozak room in the public library, and the results of the feasibility study, which ICAP completed last year, will be presented.
Any questions for our city manager? Any of you? Okay, then we'll next turn to invoices payable. And Mike, I have to ask about 20. The Sofa Loves.
The library.
We're providing that kind of...
I think it's for their area around the fireplace there. They had some chairs and such.
I thought, what's the city doing buying a Sofa Love seat? Any questions you folks have for Mike? We always let him off so easy. Jeez.
Move to pay our bills. Second.
Motion is second to pay our bills. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. We have no consensus agenda, Steve. We don't. A motion and 7 seconds to adjourn. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Thank you.